Hey everyone, ZIOA here. Welcome back to the attic, and today we're doing another ZOIA video. So this here is ZOIA. You may have seen it in a lot of recent videos. And now that I've had it a little while, I want to talk a little bit more about my experience with it. I would say this is maybe a month with it. So I haven't grasped all the depths of this pedal object quite yet. But there's still a few things we can talk about. So it's just going to sit here slightly out of focus because aesthetics or something. So ZOIA has been on my desk for pretty much all this time, and that's because I haven't gotten bored of it yet. So that's a good sign. It's a very versatile box with a lot of possibilities, and we will be covering a few use cases and a few scenarios and a few good stuff things and a few not so good stuff things. So let's start off with the reason I've got a ZOIA. That's a good starting point. If you have seen previous videos, my main interest with ZOIA was, can this be a multi-effects processor, as in can this pretty much replace a pedal board? That was sort of my vision going into this, and so far I've done a few things with it. I've used it as a effects processor and a multi-effects processor. I've also dove a little bit into the possibilities of having multiple switches do multiple things, which is pretty cool. So you can, in theory, set up all three switches to do different things. I've made a patch and video about that. That's where I started to wonder if we could go a little bit deeper than that. And I wondered if you could add layers to that ID. Because the thing with ZOIA is you can switch programs via MIDI and even via the foot switches underneath. So you can make set lists or even just put all the presets in the right order for your tracks and just cycle through them with the switches. You can go forwards and backwards in your patch order, but there is no trail mode. So the second you switch, the old sound just goes off and the new sound starts, which doesn't have to be a big issue, but it can be an issue. And that's where the experimentation started with doing more in a single patch to see if that gets rid of the issues with using trails. For instance, with delays and reverbs, it's nicer to have the sound ring out than have it cut off. So I've done some experimentation with that, yeah, you can check out those videos. That actually works pretty well. Now it is important to note that in the end this is basically a small little computer in a little box with fairly limited processing power. So if you're going to make things very complicated and you want to do a lot in a single patch, that's going to be an issue probably. So that's something to be a little bit wary of. But with basic effects processing, so we're talking distortion, reverb, delay, and different combinations of those, I haven't found much of an issue. In fact, there was a fair bit of CPU overhead even, so that's pretty good. The effects in themselves, I think, sound pretty cool. The selection is somewhat limited, but at the same time, it's still probably more effects than you will get out of any equally priced pedal. So it's a little bit of a give and take, but I always think if it's purely software, and obviously software, you might as well just sprinkle in a little bit extra because there are options to do it. Aside from being fun to make some patches with, it's actually also a pretty decent learning tool, which is, I think, one of the things I mostly enjoyed with ZOIA. Is you can do basic logic things with it, you can do some basic audio routing stuff, and you can definitely learn a thing or two from this little box, if you are interested in that sort of thing. Because that's the other side, right? This can be a very deep, complex, intimidating little thing with all the colored thingies and stuff. That's all very scary and complicated, but you can also use it much simpler, and that's just downloading patches. Now I haven't done much of the downloading patches thing, but you can go to Patchstorage, and I would highly recommend, if you're not into the editing aspects of the ZOIA, to go to Patchstorage and actually look up the kind of patches people make for this thing, because if you're not into editing this thing, you will probably be stuck with patches other people make. And there's a pretty significant community of ZOIA patch makers, so that's cool. There are some exceptionally talented people making patches for the ZOIA. One example I want to highlight is someone made a 4-track looper for the ZOIA, which is very impressive. I was actually thinking of making a looper until I saw that patch and I went, okay, well, game over. That's been finished. So yeah, definitely if you're not that much into tinkering, go to Patchstorage, check out the Empress Effect tab, or the ZOIA, I think, ZOIA, Euro Bureau ZOIA thing. You will get a very significant list of patches. The downside, of course, of using other people's patches is that if you want to tweak them, that's going to be a bit harder, although quite a few people make nice little front page UI thingies where you can more easily change the most important parameters. So as I said, I haven't used many of those patches yet because I've been very much into just having this thing on my desk, thinking of something and then trying to make it with the toolset the ZOIA offers. So let's talk a little bit about the toolset of the ZOIA. So it comes with a fair bit of logic options included. So you can do some basic and some more advanced logic, although not everything is quite as easy as it could maybe be. One of the things that kind of annoyed me is just simple things like, and this is for some reason a trend, I've had the same issue with Touch Designer and with a virtual cabinet switcher thing. I'll put the name down here because I've totally blanked out on the name. But the one thing that companies seem to really dislike is giving you the option to do exclusive switching on the foot switches. And I don't know why, because it's one of those things that is so useful to just have the option to press one switch, and if you press another switch, the first switch goes off. Or if you press the first goes off, whatever. Exclusive switching is incredibly useful because it allows you to make safe states on devices like this. And I've made a patch for that, which is cool, but that patch means you need to have that entire patch before you can even start making the patch you want to make. And I think that's typically one of those things that could be very easily included into the switch module. Just on the switch tab have a little exclusive thing, and all the switches that are tagged with exclusive, if you hit one of those switches, the other goes off. That shouldn't be too hard to code. If I can make it work with the tools given on the ZOIA, I'm very sure someone with coding experience can do that, actually. And another thing that's kind of bothered me, another one of those very simple UI things is, and I've seen more people tackle the problem, I've also made a patch for it, is double-clicking switches. Because you have 3 switches, which is pretty good. Let's not pretend like 3 switches isn't a good thing. But you might need a few more if you want to do more complicated patches with more parameter shifts, or if, like I did, you want to make a kind of pedalboard-ish like thing where you can switch effects on and off, like a loop switcher kind of thing. So, and this is effects loops, not sound loops. So if you want to do that sort of thing, it's nice to have some extra switches, and you can fairly easily tackle that with having double clicks. So if you press the switch twice within a certain amount of time, you will get a different result than pressing it once. Now I've made a patch for that, and it was actually quite a brain melter to get that to work reliably. It's also on the Patchstorage website. I think that's also one of those things that could very easily be included into the switch of, or actually the foot switch UI interface block thingy of ZOIA. It's those little things that just kind of make the end result of the entire experience with the thing much easier, I think. So that's a few complaints I'll have with that. Another thing you can run into is once you start patching, the grid looks fairly big and intimidating, but a lot of things will use 3 or 4 of those blocks. So you run out of space quickly, which in itself isn't the worst thing, because you have way too many pages to ever use, because you're going to bottom out the CPU way before you fill all the pages, I think. Well, unless you just turn all the pages into mixers and then not input anything, but within reasonable use you're not going to run out of space. But there's still the kind of visual issue with having filled grids like this, because it becomes very hard to track what's going on. So one thing I would love to see, and Autolus does this very well, is the ability to group multiple modules into a single square. Now, this might be tricky on this kind of UI thing. I'm very aware of that. It's not an easy task to do. But I do feel it could potentially be possible to make the option to just store an entire page or a set of pages into a single block. So you can also easily duplicate it if needed. And it just doesn't take up as much space and as much visual space. And since with a lot of things you're not going to touch most of it, it's nice to just tuck it away and make a little bit of room. You can of course just move it to a page you're not going to see, which is a solution. But I don't know, I feel like having the option to make smaller compartments within blocks could be a very useful feature. That being said, I'm aware that there's obviously always going to be some limitations with a UI like this, because there's not that much UI going on. Now that's also one of the kind of downside-ish things of ZOIA. If you are going to make patches, you're probably aware of what you're doing where in the patch, so you can get quite fluent with moving around patches. Not so much when you're downloading other people's patches, or if you go back to a patch after a certain amount of time. So if you make elaborate patches, you play around with it a bit, you move on, and you get back after like a month, there's a fairly good chance you are going to get confused with what's going on with your patches. I'm not quite sure how to solve it. I believe there is a thing that can import these presets and make them visual, but I'm not 100% sure, so I still have to dig into that. Just like the community created patches, that's also a thing I need to invest more so I can talk more about it. Just as a learning tool and as a effects unit, I think it's absolutely awesome. It's just great to have on your desk to play around with. If you're into this kind of thing, if you're like, oh, that's interesting, you're probably going to like it. It's fairly quick. You can just plug in your guitar, think of something, make it, play around with it, have fun. That's cool. As a board replacement thing, which by the way it isn't meant to be, so I can't completely fault it for being not flawless in that aspect. I would say it has potential, but it isn't quite there yet. There's still some room for improvement. Effects wise, very competent unit, although the effects that are in it by default are all fairly stripped down effects. The idea, of course, is that you can combine stuff and make more complicated effects, or you can just go to the Patchstorage and download more complicated effects. So with having had the ZOIA for quite a while, where am I at right now? So I still very much like it. I think it's a very potent little box with a lot of possibilities. Also the simple fact that you can use this at multiple places in a monochain, which I've also demonstrated in a video, makes this, even as a utility box, very, very handy, because you can, for instance, feed your guitar straight into it, have a compressor running, do some standard EQing stuff, then go out to your pedal board and go back into the ZOIA, for instance, for a noise gate or some final effects. That makes it pretty space efficient and very powerful and very useful. And I think that also makes the price instantly a lot more appealing, because instead of having to buy 2 or 3 or 4 pedals, you can just buy this one pedal, set it up, have it going, and you can actually tweak it very deeply. So I'm still very much a fan of ZOIA. I'm also rooting for the ZOIA team to keep developing ZOIA. And I'm very much hoping that the community will keep supporting ZOIA, because that's ultimately the power of this thing. For tinkerers, for people that just like to mess around with stuff, right, like me, the state that it's in is perfectly fine, right? I can have a lot of fun with this, I can do a lot of experimentation stuff with it, and it's cool. But if you're a day-to-day user, you're not that interested into the tinkering stuff, you're going to be dependent on the community. And whether or not the community keeps making things depends greatly on the support of this product, of course. Which brings me to one final thing that I actually forgot, which very much annoys me. I've actually been interested in using ZOIA as a drum computer because I have a bunch of synths here. The JDXA, JV1080 down here, a D50, System 1. So I have synths. I'm not interested in having another synth. That's not my use case for this. It's an effects processor for me, and that's the main use case. But I was thinking, considering we have a sampler, I could actually turn this into a drum computer. Then I can use my KeyStep Pro, sequence the drum computer, sequence some synthesizers. That would be a pretty cool kind of DAW-less party trick. The annoying thing is, and I know samplers in beta, so I'm going to be a little bit kind on them, but they have managed to choose the exact sample rate and bit rate that no single sample pack I own, and I have quite a few sample packs, not a single sample pack uses those bit rates and sample rates. So I actually can't just import any of my drum samples into ZOIA, which is the most annoying thing in the world. Because I was very excited. I had a nice long night ahead of me. I had the ZOIA on my desk. I had the microSD card in my computer. I selected all my samples. I put them on there, and every single sample was rejected by ZOIA because it didn't meet the specifications. And that's something I think the ZOIA team really needs to sort out, because that's very frustrating. But that's basically my biggest complaint about ZOIA. So if you're not interested in using it as a sampler at all, don't worry about that stuff, right? Just check out if the patches you can find sound good to you, if they look fun to you, and go for it. If you're interested into tinkering with stuff and you watch the video, I think Loopop did a video about it. If you watch that video and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, you can get it. That's fine. If that video confuses you, probably a bad idea to go with a ZOIA. So yeah, 1 month later-ish, I haven't checked the exact date. I'm still very much positive about ZOIA. It has a few downfalls, but overall, this is a fun little pedal. So expect more ZOIA content later on, but we're also going to mix it up with some voltage stuff, and we'll get back to this one for sure. If there are any questions about ZOIA, just leave them down below. I will see if I can answer them. There's also a very cool ZOIA community Facebook page, so if you're hesitant about things ZOIA, you can kindly ask there if there's people with experiences with things. Just keep in mind, keep it ZOIA related, right? I've seen a few people be like, can I use, I don't know, a Line 6 app or something with a ZOIA? Maybe, but I'm pretty sure no one is going to bother making a decoding layer between those things, right? So keep it ZOIA, and yeah, that's it. See ya.